been doing that like gratefully since I was in like third grade. I had a teacher who had me write, and so I've been, you know, I loved it, and it's something I just always stuck with. And you know, bounce back and forth between different forms. And I have been in the Bay Area, well, in San Francisco for the last 6 years, and came here by way of San Diego, San Diego State, where I got my MFA, and you know, by Wilmington, North Carolina, where I studied, you know, creative writing and English professional writing, like writing and technology, and then, or by way of Smithfield, North Carolina, which is known for the outlets along I-95 and the birthplace of paper garment.
Are they just really large outlets, or?
It's just that there's not, yeah, basically, there's a lot of large outlets and not a lot else.
Got it. And how did you find out about this guaranteed income pilot? How did it come to your attention? And can you tell us a little bit about what the application process was like for you?
Yeah, so I initially came across it, I believe, I think initially I just saw it in a Chronicle or SF Weekly, and you know, I was like, oh, this would, you know, this is amazing. I've actually do follow a lot of things related to like UBI, guaranteed minimum income, and so I was like excited that it existed, but I felt like I almost didn't apply to it.
Why?
One, because I mean, I had applied for like several like grants and things, and was just kind of like, there's a lot of things up there. I almost don't want to take up like a lot of space, you know, with that. And then I had a friend, shout out to Harry O'Leary.
Hello, friend. Is this person here or just a general?
Just a general
to the universe. Thank you.
Yeah. And he sent it to me because he knows that artists in San Francisco, knows that like, oh, you know, not necessarily like make a lot, and that I also thought guaranteed income, and so I mean universal income. So he sent it and was like, no, you should apply for this. Like, you qualify, you should apply for this, and I did.
And what was the moment where you realized that you were going to be a part of this pilot? Can you tell us what that felt like?
And it's just, yeah, I mean, there was a sense of just like relief. There's over, you know, just this large, just like, oh wow, this is not just a thing that I'm like, this is a, you know, this is something I've like read about that would be cool.
And it's $1,000 a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for 6 months. So this is not going to change the game like completely for folks, right? They can't live. No one can live on $1,000 a month in the city.
Sure.
But it's something. So tell us a little bit about what, and then I'm going to get to you and kind of the logistics and the operations of this. But tell us about $1,000 a month for 6 months. You know, what has that meant? How do you think it has changed how you lived those 6 months, and also in particular how it may have, you know, affected your work as an artist?
Right. So I mean, I think there were a lot of just like very general like pressures. It made me set aside time where I was like, okay, this is limited. What needs to be prioritized? And one of the very first things was like, you know, I had spent like, I mean, many years when I first moved here, and then several months or more than a little over a year during the pandemic, trying to get like, sort of battling with Kaiser, or not battling, but but trying to, you know, just get help with like mental health services. And so I was like, oh, some money I want to put aside for that. And then also in helping with that. And then so there were those things, but there were also things that were kind of like not meant to, you know, of course, like just spending more time with working on my own writing, which I sort of put aside because I work like 3-4 like part-time things.
Do you mind letting me know what those are?
Oh yeah. So I am the director of Litquake's Elder Writing Project. So Litquake, you know.
Oh yeah, we've hosted Litquake. Yeah.
So I do that. I'm also a, you know, coding instructor and tutor, teacher assistant at Kickstart Coding, which is in Oakland, which is like, you know, it's great. It's in a co-op structure, and so you know, it's super affordable, which is fantastic for like, you know, students and things, and you know, but it's also very dependent on like, the amount of, work that is sort of one to be done, the amount of funds we have, and three, the amount of students we can serve. So there was like that, sort of, component of it. And then I do, just freelance web development for, on contract. And so that is totally based just on, what shows up.
Got it, okay. So what I'm hearing is it allowed you to free up time and space to actually do your art more, is that right?
Definitely did that. I mean, it allowed me to, I took a trip with, my fiance and,
You're pointing to someone.
yeah, no one can hear.
Oh, hello.
Kate.
Hi, fiance. Must be nice having a partner. That's so good. That's so great. I'm so happy for you. Yeah. Spread the love a little bit.
There will be time. But with her and Darian and River, my kiddos, and we went to North Carolina for a big family reunion, and there was like, family I haven't seen in years, some family I haven't even met, as well as like, and that it would have been a much harder thing, and a thing that I may not have even been able to do without funding from that program. And one of the things that like, the thing I sort of like I'm like working on examining in my work is, what it means to be like, a Black poet in San Francisco. And what does it mean to like be a San Francisco poet is one part of it. What does it mean to be Black in San Francisco? What does it mean to be a poet in San Francisco? And then what does that mean in terms of like my history? And so, I learned in person a story from my, uncle. He's like, he's now, my father passed last year, and he's now like the oldest, like in my immediate family. And it's like I learned that I had, my grandmother, I knew about her other siblings, but she had two other brothers, and one was like lynched down the street from the church that I went to growing up, and another one just like disappeared. And it's like it's like there was so much in just like conversations, but also family histories, and thinking about like how that informs not just like me as a person and like where I'm from, but also what I am trying to create and talk about.
So I feel like I have to ask you, what do you think it means to be a Black poet in San Francisco in 2021?
Wow. Yeah, I'm still working through that. That's what I'm like grateful for the space to even like contemplate. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure it's a thought that a journey that is going to be continuing as you continue to develop as an artist. So tell us a little bit about how this came about. Where did did you pitch this to the city, or were they like, we're going to do this? I know this was part of the $60 million of reallocation of money, but like who, where did this, from whence did this come? And then tell us a little bit about what it was like getting it off the ground, and kind of getting it started.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to pick up on where you were, Kevin, as a way to head into that. And that's just to say, like, thank you so much for sharing what you just shared. I think when we think about artists and other people in this city, in this country, who do not have what we refer to as economic security, meaning access to healthcare, affordable housing, food justice, like all these things, what is lost? Not only what can be gained if we address that problem, but what's lost. And what I hear that is so deep for me, I'm kind of like taken aback, is that even our own sense of lineage can be lost, and how the stories we tell from one generation to another will be lost.
And the art is lost.
The art is lost, that's right. Thank you very much. And it just really rings for me in terms of, I've been at YBCA for 8 years. I've been working in this community my whole adult life, and I have been dedicated to trying to understand and help address the problems in our systems, and the inequity, and just generational inequity in our systems, and also, again, what we refer to as economic security. And so for years at YBCA, we've been really looking at those issues, and we've been experimenting in many ways around what it means to invest differently, and what it means to shift resources and power directly to communities and to artists, because artists and communities are the best designers of their own systems and structures. And so we were all having these conversations. I had many more time than we have to share some of the radical things we've been doing, including one example other than guaranteed income, which is an artist-led giving circle. So this is a group of 15 or so artists. They're mostly BIPOC. They're coming from different parts of the country, including the Bay. They were in conversation with us about investment. To your point earlier, artists actually have really incredibly bold ideas. If we create the conditions for them to help imagine a better future, we will get there. So as we were listening to these artists talking about what investment meant, this thing happened. They started to talk about what would happen if one of us got invested in. And it was just like, boom, well, then we're all invested in. Because this is what happens when you invest in artists. They in turn invest back into their communities. And it's not a return on investment, it's a ripple of investment that's almost impossible to trace. So not only do they share and exchange, but they create and they grow and they build. And these things happen that we can't imagine. So all that's going on for YBCA. We're in a pandemic. I did serve on Mayor Breed's Economic Recovery Task Force and also had the great honor of serving on Governor Newsom's. There were conversations about this stuff out at the end of the task force here in San Francisco, which was very city driven, very city staff driven. There came a set of recommendations. There wasn't a recommendation for guaranteed income. That hadn't been something we had really explored in the task force. But I think all those recommendations then went to the city. As best I know, I don't work for the city, I can't say, but as best I know, this idea really came from our mayor, who believes in guaranteed income and is interested and has other pilots, including one called Abundant Mothers. And so I think she took in the spirit of all of these recommendations, and she decided that it would be worthwhile for us to pilot. And pilot is key here. We are piloting something in order to learn from it so that we can use those learnings to advance policy. So that at the end of the day, we can have a guaranteed income program, not only in the city, not only for artists, but in the country and for all the people who need it. And so for us, it's about pilot and learning and testing and sharing. So that's RFP came out. We were like, what? You know, like, that's awesome. And we've already been doing a lot of this work, and we have some infrastructure that we really desperately wanted to lend to the time, to the urgency of the moment. So we applied and we got the grant. So that's how it happened. I don't know exactly how the decisions were made. I think there was a panel. And as soon as we received the grant, it came with an enormous amount of responsibility to design something that balanced expediency with equity. And in a time when you're thinking about people who are one paycheck away from a life-changing event, you pull towards expediency, which means you're not moving at the speed of trust. So that was an interesting thing to try to balance. How do we do this right, but do it quickly? We are part of the economic security network in this country, and we have Mayor Tubbs recently, you know, we're in there. We are very involved in learning best practices. We're engaged with other pilots that are happening across the country. We are trying to gather up our data so that it can be powerfully irrefutable. And you know, then we went from there and designed a process, which I can share any level of detail you want.
Yeah, before we get into the process, I just found one of the things that I found interesting, and would love to hear your thoughts on this as well, is it feels like a lot of professions, maybe artist seems to be one of those things where everyone just kind of, it's like, okay, it's like assumed that that's something that people do when they're, you know, not as their actual job. You know, you have, like, when you hear that there's an artist that also has 3 or 4 part-time jobs, people kind of nod and they're like, yeah, that tracks, like that's what you do. But it almost feels exceptional in that way, almost. Whereas a lot of other people, a lot of other professions, people just assume that when you say you do it, there isn't this, you know, waiting to hear what you do to actually make money. So before we get into all the nitty-gritty, I wanted to just give you the opportunity to talk about that. Do you think we're living in a moment where people are starting to think about the profession of artist differently?
Well, I mean, it's well, I always want to like, I'm like, oh, how can I make the question smaller? Because I could just go on and on about things. But I think we're in this like a super like pivotal time and we're in this space where like, we can make the, like, sort of like the, there's no like right, decisions, there's like incorrect decisions necessarily. We can head in a direction that, is more towards like, these issues that are, that are about, inequality, that are about like, economic equity and beyond. Or we can continue in the direction that we're moving, like, economically, politically, like, culturally, and we could become way more divided and collapse. Like it's just like, wow. And I feel like there's like it's what you're saying, like the power of sort of being, power again, and an artist, there just comes with this responsibility really, because being an artist is really like making a connection between, making a connection between, okay, this is how the world works, and it's very like micro, it's like taking it from a great microcosm of like the universe or, society, and here are all these metaphors essentially, whether it's like poetry, whether it's sculpture, whether it's dance, this is how the world works through like my lens in this moment at this particular time. And what that can lead to is hopefully like, have people like sort of, question and be able to like, sort of take that like argument in this like, sort of peaceful way, and be able to like work towards, own sort of like, personal or, larger like reckonings. And so I feel like there's like this, I think people just like sort of inherently recognize this like, this like potential, and are either trying to like guard it. We're seeing a lot of like, again, funding for the arts, especially like in, in relief, but then there are also those who are afraid of that. And so I think
Others who are afraid of that?
there are others just,
Yeah.
Sort of in general, like.
Talk to me about, and I obviously would love your reactions to my first question, but I just asked, but also as we get into it for the sake of time, tell me about the hardest thing what was the hardest thing about administering and choosing and actually going through the operations of this pilot?
I mean, I think the hardest thing about administering it was a lot of misinformation that flowed in the community.
Tell me about that.
So this is a San Francisco City funded pilot, 6 months. We knew when we went into it that we didn't believe 6 months was long enough. To really give us time to understand the impact that happens in an artist's life, in her family, and in her community. We wanted to align the pilot with kind of what we see as best practice happening around the country, 18 months minimally. So we were looking to how do we actually raise private dollars, but when you're working with city funding, there are constraints, number one, and those constraints are related to Proposition 209 and what you can and cannot do with taxpayer dollars, and what you can and cannot preference based on what you're trying to do. So the one challenge for us as an organization was how to work within those constraints as creatively as possible so that we could reach the people who were hardest hit, so that we could reach the target communities that we set out to reach and that Mayor Breed wanted us to reach. There's a lot of myth about what we did or didn't do related to that, but I'm really proud of the risks we took as an organization in order to prioritize people by a set of criteria that we thought would help us reach those people best.
Was this like white artists that felt like they were passed over for artists of color, or?
No, honestly, I think that, not entirely, I think that it is, my feeling on it is that the criticism that we received is much more about generational inequity in San Francisco
I see.
and a feeling of scarcity.
I see.
I don't know that much of the criticism is squarely rooted in an understanding of what guaranteed income is, why you would pilot something, which is different than doing something.
I see.
Right, so it's more along those lines. So that was challenging, and for me, as someone who's worked really hard for a really long time, to see our community not believe that together we can actually do so much more was challenging for me.
That makes me a little bit sad.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about the program right now?
Well, I'm thrilled. I mean, I couldn't be prouder of how the team, and I cannot take credit for this, Isa's here, but like how the team has designed something as beautiful as they did while receiving a lot of criticism, and that they were able to reach the artists that we set out to reach. And I had 2 artists approach me at an event that we had at YBCA a few weeks ago. And both, let me just say this, both of them, I spoke, so that's how they knew who I was. You know, so I'm the fortunate one, but they both cried. They both talked about how it impacted their lives in terms of economics. One talked about housing and talked about how it was the first time that they had ever felt safe in their life. The
Wow.
second one talked about healthcare, as did you. And then both of them talked about how they returned it to their community. So I was able to hire some of my artist friends. I was able to think about a project that I couldn't have even imagined because this gave me the space to think. I'd do anything to be in a place where that's what people can say about their lives. So I'm down for it. Throw it at me. It's all good.
I guess I have to ask, I mean, Deborah, so the pilot is not over yet, it ends in October. Can you share some early learnings? I mean, like you said, the pilot is to actually glean some data, some understanding, some learnings for future things. So what have you guys learned so far?
So one thing that I will say is we made good on our promise, which was that we would not stop with a 6-month pilot. We raised $3.6 million. Thank you to Jack Dorsey and Start Small.
Come on, Jack Dorsey.
Yeah.
You're doing some good things.
And his teammates there,
Awesome.
I can't say enough, frankly. So that $3.6 million will enable us to, thank you, Kevin gets to be with us for not 6 months, but 18 months.
That's right.
So all of the current 130 artists are extended so that it's a full 18-month pilot. And then we are going to add, with the money from Start Small, 50 additional artists working directly with 5 community-based organizations who will choose for themselves and help us design a process that is not constrained. And then YBCA is going to add an additional 20 artists. So we're up to, what is that, 200?
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, let's hear that. That's so great. I didn't know that. Is San Francisco the only city in the union that is doing this right now?
Well, we now have, that is true, and the city funding is what's key about that. Now in St. Paul, an extraordinary organization, Springboard for the Arts, is doing a guaranteed income pilot, but it's funded privately. And the state of New York, and you asked this question about, are people starting to see artists in a different light? Do we understand that artists are like the original gig workers and how vulnerable that can make you if you're waiting from one thing to the next? And in New York, the state of New York, and also funded by private philanthropy, is doing a program called Creative Rebuilds New York, and that will include a guaranteed income pilot and workforce development pilot.
Nice.
And so the idea here is it's getting started. They're taking, you know, our pilot is widely regarded for its design, so we're able to help share how we designed.
You can brush your shoulders off.
You know,
just
I'm
a little
doing
bit, just a little.
what I can. Yeah.
Piece of popcorn, you've got to brush that off.
Yeah, and learnings were early days. We're just, you know, in the first couple of months of it, we are doing surveys. We had ambassadors who are working with cohorts of artists in groups to like learn from them and understand them. And for those artists, you know, this is a program where you are not obligated. This is no strings attached. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to tell us your name. Like, I mean, we need to pay you, but other than that, it's no strings attached. And that's really key. It's not a grant. There aren't deliverables you don't have to expect. And so for Kevin to be willing to go public and to share with us that he was in a place in his life where this kind of program worked for him is him sharing details about his life with us. And so that's courageous and powerful. And, you know, those cohorts of artists have taught us a lot about how much we could unleash. Really, that's like the anecdotal learning is like how much we could unleash in these artists if they weren't struggling so much.
I have just a couple more questions, then I'll get to the audience questions as well. there was this moment of the pandemic where we all kind of, so I've lived here for 9 years. And yeah, 9 years. And I've never worked in tech. I've been able to, people think that I have, but I haven't. And I've always basically worked in some field of politics, activism, and figured out a way to make my life work here. But a lot of my friends in activism and politics, my field, which isn't art, but it is politics, have left, aren't here anymore, can't afford it. So I get it, that piece of it. And there was this moment in the pandemic in the beginning where those of us who have been able to figure out a way to live here without making a lot of money thought, oh my God, is San Francisco going to become affordable again? Like, our rents, is this 30% drop in rents going to stay? Can you get a 1-bedroom for $2,000 a month now? Like, is this happening? Like this, and I think a lot of us were talking like, is this going to stay? And here we are. It's August 2021, and I think most people are basically realizing that that was a blip, and San Francisco is probably not going to become an oasis of portability anytime soon. And so if we agree that that is the case, what do you think the future of art and artists are in a city that will continue to be as expensive as San Francisco?
I can jump in to say that I think we have a choice as a city about how we end up answering that question, meaning if we can believe that we are a place of abundance with endless creativity, lots of resources, let's be real, lots of money, like we have all these things, we have beautiful, just so much that if we could step back and think together about what the systems need to be. And it can't be simply about a guaranteed income. We need income security, we need to address housing issues, we need to look at our nonprofit ecosystem. I think some of the criticism in my mind also comes from the fact that we have just inequitably funded organizations, and we also destabilize them when we make them dependent on the city. Like, let's build capacity, let's believe in people, let's show that we see their leadership. And so, I am fortunate to be on the board of the Community Art Stabilization Trust, which is looking at housing and affordability and nonprofit space.
How many damn boards are you on?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm not answering that, but so it's like, why don't we look at this all together, and where's the vision, and how does the vision get translated, and how do we all work together to believe that this can actually be the creative and like innovative and really progressive place that it is and should be.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Because we're at that time, and it's something where I feel like there's a lot of art that happens here, at least that I sort of encountered like in the space of like creative writing and like literature that's like imported. It's like sort of imported from the East Bay, or it's imported from further down in the parts of like sort of past the peninsula, or people coming from sort of other spaces. And I mean, I can honestly say I would not be able to even afford living here at all, or not for like I'm also like a part of or was or trying to the mayor's housing program, so like a below market rate apartment. Otherwise, I would not. I could not afford it. And so it is. It's not just it can't all be solved by like one from one direction. It has to be across the board, and in the if there are those resources that are made sort of available for artists, and to like, because it does happen, you just naturally share. I don't know what it is, but I've met I mean it's just there's so much gratitude and abundance even when there's little that sort of should be shared resources. And so if that space is made, then it can there could be another like sort of big wave.
This is a question that is so close to home, because this space is funded by a community of individuals who pay $36 a month to support our work, which is a very novel way to fund a small business. And the reason, and there aren't very many small businesses that are funded this way, but it is because in San Francisco in 2021, this model doesn't work on its own. It needs to be, and we're interviewing 4 press outlets that started over the last 2 years after this. The world we live in today, there does seem to be this move of like, if a community wants something, the community needs to fund it. And you know, this is interesting because it's public money and high dollar money from, you know, wealthy individuals. But I guess I want to ask, do you think that there is some way that San Franciscans as a community could support a rich artistic environment? Because I do feel like San Franciscans want the art scene to be amazing here. You know, I went to the reopening of a venue last night, the Pearl, and it was such a beautiful space, and there was all this beautiful art everywhere. And I was just in New York last week, and you know, I was doing the whole like West Coast person, a little bit envious of the East Coast's cultural and artistic richness, and be like, where's our art scene? You know, I want all this stuff. And so I think San Franciscans want this. People want a political and civic event space to go and learn about what's happening in the world. But how do you make that connection between we want this and, well, if you're going to want it, you have to fund it?
Yeah, I mean, there's something that you're saying, this is off the top, so it might not be quite right, but there's like a difference between the way that we have our, you know, small town political battles at City Hall over limited dollars, and what you're describing, which is bypassing all of that and building a community that supports itself. And for me, it's that. And it's doing that in a way that then enforces our policies and therefore our public funding structures to get in line, like, you know, to reorganize, right? So it's got to start with us. It's got to start with our willingness to work together. And, you know, as you were talking about the model here for Manny's, it was just making me think about conversations we're having with a big group of artists at YBCA about what a shared futures could look like. Like, what does it look like if we are developing shared futures model that are mutual? They're about all of us, and we know our role in those models, and we are actually investing in ourselves. And so, and for me, a part of that also has to be that money is not the only thing of value in this world, and we need to figure out how to stop thinking that it is, so that the people with money are not the loudest voice in the room. And you know, when I think of shared futures, I think of artists doing skill sharing, artists doing exchanges, artists training one another as extremely valuable as somebody who just contribute money. And so those are the structures I think San Francisco is ripe for.
Right. I mean, that sort of, just like to pop in, but that kind of,
please.
That gets to, I mean, I don't know, and this is sort of, I guess, in some of the early stages, but I know that, you know, YBCA is doing the like artist power, you know, platform community. That's why things like that are important. That's why the importance of even, you know, mentioned the leads that were, you know, sort of brought in. And a great thing that happened is when we were sort of brainstorming of like, oh, how can this be useful? You know, really, I love, you know, there were so many things that were like, you know, thrown out where there was space made for artists to like come up with ideas to collaborate, where there was that grant writing workshop, which is kind of there's another piece to that, because it's all about as well, like who has access to like even know how to navigate the systems, like, because that is really like, that's really key. And it took me, I feel like, way too long to even begin to like learn and sort of process these things. And so how can we you know, spread that, you know? But yeah.
Well, Kevin, thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable and coming up here and telling us about your art and your journey to this point. And I wish you all the love and success in the world. And Deborah, being a leader, especially in the arts community, she ain't easy. So I can only imagine, probably not almost as bad as being in the political activism world.
Really
quite equal.
They're the same. We need to have a mezcal and soda probably at some point, share some stories.
Yeah.
Let's, before we get to audience Q&A, I just want to say, support your arts organizations. You know what I mean? No one gets to complain about San Francisco not being the city they want it to be until you fund the Red Poppy Art House and YBCA and, you know, the Red Victorian. And don't say that, you know, San Francisco doesn't have the activism and the political juice that it once, you know, used to have, unless you're going to 518 Valencia and, you know, you're showing up to city arts and lectures, and you're coming to Manny's. I mean, support these organizations. We need your love. Audience Q&A. Who's got the first question? Right over there.
All right, I have a few things to say, and sorry, I'm a little anxious around people.
It's okay. Don't worry.
The first thing is the reference to you know an artist being this person who can do a craft and then have another job or two other jobs. This is something that I heard a lot from my parents. I hear it from people on the street. Oh, he's doing what he likes to do.
Yeah.
And it's not an enjoyable process for me by stretching the imagination. And when you really dedicate yourself to your craft, so I don't mean to throw around credentials here, but you know, I went to college for 12 years. I have a technical degree. Went to an Ivy League school, designing laser systems. And that takes some pretty extreme cognitive bandwidth, both getting through that program and working on, you know, systems. It pales in comparison to scope and scale of the amount of focus that the spotlight of my attention requires to do my art. There is nothing else that I can possibly squeeze in. I wake up and the first thing I do is roll over and start making corrections. And I do that all day till I go to sleep, fall asleep as I'm making corrections. The other thing that I wanted to say is the connection between culture and art. And I don't think you can even separate the two. It's the artists that make culture. It's the engine that drives, you know, a group culture, a national culture, you know, however you want to find the size of the collective. But it is imperative to have a strong and thriving art community to drive culture forward. And in no other time in my life, my short life, have I seen a greater need for artists than now, which we are under some of the most culturally uncertain times. And it really is up to the artists to be the torchbearers. It's kind of, I don't know where it's going to end up. No artist does. But,
What's your name?
Daniel.
Daniel. You don't seem nervous at all. You're very articulate. You're able to express your contributions very cogently. So thank you for that, and I appreciate it, Daniel. Thank you for your contributions to this discussion. Thank you. Also, if folks have questions on the Zoom, it sounds like there's people are dialing in. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to them. Are there burning questions that should be asked?
Yes, we do have one.
Okay.
This is from Lisa.
Okay. Hi, Lisa.
She says, post-COVID, I'm hoping that the city will open up to create ideas for revising the art support network, housing support networks, etc., by artists and others wanting to contribute in rebuilding the system. Are there any conversations, this is directed to you, Deborah, or planning going on now in those arenas?
I think that's a really great question, and I can only speak to my experience in terms of the city proper, because again, I don't work for the city, but my sense is that yes, there are. And I think, as we know, our mayor is very supportive of the arts and is looking carefully at the ecosystem and really working to address the inequity that has existed for forever. And I also will say that at places like YBCA and like Manny's, these are our dream spaces. These are the spaces that can lend to visioning that is collective. And we don't have to have city structures that undertake planning processes for us as the people of the city to come together and dream a different way forward and then again make it happen. And I think Daniel's point is really important. It kind of goes back to your question about San Francisco, Manny. If we believe that artists drive culture, and we also believe, which I do, that culture precedes change, that culture is what can shift hearts and minds. And if we want lasting change, we need to drive culture. And so how we work together as a community of people who care and build a culture that is about change is really where the future of the city is, I think.
I do have to kind of just mention, I mean, this came about as a connection between a politician, people in politics, you as a convener of artists and this kind of virtuous circle. It makes me really proud, I think. And we could have a whole nother conversation about the intersection of art and politics, but we don't have time for that right now. You have a question?
Yeah, my name's Carmen Deneva.
Hi.
Hi, I was just curious, you mentioned a lot about different aspects that kind of work together to make this program whole. And I was just sort of wondering if there was any kind of platform for like support for the artists, or any kind of like collaboration maybe platform or something like to that effect. I don't know, I just know that support is like a really important part of our infrastructure working. And so yeah, that's just basically the question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really great question. And yes, so with the guaranteed income pilot specifically, because it's no strings attached, there is no requirement that artists collaborate right? And so we built a structure that was voluntary, that enabled us to bring groups of artists together with artist advocates, artist ambassadors to facilitate conversations that would help us understand what these artists might want to do together and what individually and collectively they might need. And so Kevin addressed some of those things, like we heard grant writing workshop, got it done. We heard, right, so that. The other thing that Kevin also brought up, thank you, is the Artist Power Center. So at the beginning of the pandemic, like many organizations, we worked with, in careful collaboration with a number of organizations, including Zoo Labs and Black Joy Parade in Oakland, to launch an artist relief fund. It was focused, $500, it was focused on those artists specifically who are living one paycheck away from change. We were able to build a program, really easy application process, totally accessible, and distribute like tons of relief checks. I gotta say, side note, I don't know that I've ever been involved in a grant writing process where I want to send thank you notes to people. We got thank you notes from the artists because of the accessibility, which was really, it just,
So are those workshops going to be something?
So yeah, so the Artist Power Center is a platform that we're developing, and it is, for YBCA, think of it as a power center too. Our goal is to bring artists into connection with one another, both online and in real life, and to connect artists with livelihood, with the opportunity. So this is not just grants. We're not just gonna like list up a bunch of grants. This is about like jobs, grants, skill sharing, opportunities. And our commitment is to grow demand for artists so that people who might want to hire you or might have an idea or something, or like, someone who's working around a particular issue and understands they can't advance that issue if they're not working with artists, that we would start to grow a kind of, for lack of a better word, marketplace. So that's happening. The Artist Power Center is right now in a closed alpha kind of situation, meaning like we're testing it out. And stay tuned because it will be opening publicly not long from now.
Let's have one more question. We have one from the
Yes.
from the Zoom room that we've created, and thank you For those of you who are dialing in on Zoom, thank you. We appreciate you.
This is from Linda, and it's actually related to the previous question. What can the average San Francisco?
Okay, I kind of like this music.
My cell phone is ringing.
I know, I'm trying to figure out what the song is. What is it?
I'm gonna let you figure it out.
It's the cityscape tonight. Okay, so Linda asks, what can the average San Franciscan do to support the continuation and expansion of this guaranteed income program for artists? And then Lisa added, how can we as citizens contribute to these conversations at the intersection of revising or re-envisioning our city and pivoting its priorities?
Damn, big questions to end on.
Just a couple. I mean, the first question around what can individuals do to help extend and expand this program? I mean, I think one, Manny hit it already, just support the artists and the arts and culture organizations that you care about. And it doesn't matter who they are, like support them because we take them for granted. And that leads to resource and opportunity. And then the second is join us in the policy conversation. You know, Isa is here, she is heading up a lot of our policy work. And if anyone can assure that we are going to be able to take the learning and move it forward, we've got it right here. And so let's get this done. This is an opportunity for arts organizations to think differently about how they support their own artist community. But in my mind, this kind of program is the responsibility of our government. And we need a guaranteed income or some other version of a program that enables people to feel a sense of security in their lives that they are not feeling now. And as individuals, we should fight that fight together.
Awesome. Kevin, do you want to have the last word?
Yeah, I mean, I guess coming back to both of your points, and I know I love Manny that you mentioned a couple of like, organizations, and I would, I mean, I guess thinking tangibly, I would think about some of those, right? So some of, all those that you mentioned, League Foundation, of course. I mean, coming up next, I know the San Franciscan is a part of that talk, fantastic magazine, like highly recommend that. Looking at all the cultural centers, like Manny's and like other spaces which are also doing like Chinese cultural center. And there's been a big collaboration between Michael Ward and oh my gosh, how am I forgetting? Oh my god, it's like slipping. I'm like losing my head. This is what happens.
There's a lot going on in the world.
Lots going on. Lots of just Googling. Following his board of supervisors, Matt Haynes,
Yeah.
always talking about great
Yeah.
things.
Well, I love that. And just to tie it all together, we've talked a lot about abundance tonight. What do you do when you can do things? And I think one thing that individuals can do is if you feel like you have some abundance, use that abundance to support and subscribe to the organizations and the places that you want to have in your city, because that is exactly how they will stay. And I believe in San Francisco and I believe in San Franciscans. I have to say that my business existing throughout the pandemic is a testament to San Franciscans saying, I want a place like this in my city. So I'm biased by my own personal experience and blessed by it, of course. But the burnt sienna couches that you sit in are a physical representation of the fact that San Franciscans wanted a place like this. We just need more. We need every San Franciscan that can to subscribe to, and this is a perfect segue to the next event where we're going to be talking to 3 new publications that these people, and we're talking about artists now, but journalism and the news is a whole nother area that has been decimated over the last 30 years, and where we desperately need people to support good media if we're going to live in an environment where truth is being, power is being held accountable, and we're learning about what's happening in our city, and the stories that need to be told are being told. So I think that is a takeaway I'd love for everyone that's tuning in, that's going to watch us after the fact, and that are here today with us. I would take with you. YBCA.org, right, is a great front page to learn about the YBCA. Your website is what, or how to find you online?
KevinDublin.com.
KevinDublin.com. Manny's pays our artists every Sunday from 3 to 6. We have free live jazz for the community, curated by Jazz Mafia. So if you want one very easy way to help us, you can come on Sundays from 3 to 6 and listen to some amazing live jazz. Revolution Cafe is gone, unfortunately. They were holding down the fort here at the Mission by providing opportunities for specifically artists in the jazz fields to play for the community. So we're trying to keep the fire burning. You can become a sponsor of Manny's at welcometomannys.com. Or for the first time ever, you can just take your phone and scan the QR code on any of the pillars and support us. We'd really appreciate it. If you'd like to stay for the next talk, it'll be in 27 minutes on the press with 3 new press outlets and what they've learned over the last 16 months. Let's give a big round of applause to Kevin Dublin and Deborah Cullinan for talking to us about Artists beyond. You're welcome. All right, good night, everyone, and stay safe out there. 4 weeks and we'll be back to normal.
That's right.
All right.